Hello and welcome back in everybody, Levi here. Today I got a brand new deck tech for you from Modern Horizons 3. The commander I'm talking about today is Phlage, Titan of Fire's Fury. It's one, a red and a white for a 6/6 Elder Giant, has a couple of ETB triggers. The first one, when Phlage ETBs, sacrifice it unless it escaped. The second one, whenever Phlage enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. And obviously it has the escape cost for red, red, white, white. You also have to exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. So obviously the main ability we're focusing on is that ETB or attacks that you deal 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. That's basically just Lightning Helix but on an ETB for your commander. And the way you want to run this deck, or at least the way I'm building it, is we want to be able to respond to our commander's sacrifice trigger by using certain cards that will give us a little bit extra value. So basically this is a Fling deck. Fling is an instant for 1 and a red. As an additional cost to cast Fling, you sacrifice a creature, then Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. So when you cast your commander, both the ETB triggers pop on the stack and you can respond to the sacrifice one by sacrificing it to Fling. That way you can get a little bit of additional value out of your commander as opposed to just getting the 3 damage and 3 life. You can also get the additional 6 damage, and we could just pump that damage up by having some of our other cards that I'll go into a little bit later. But we also have cards like Brian Stout Arm that is a repeatable way to Fling. So 2, a red and a white for a 4/4 giant warrior with lifelink. Pay a red and tap, sacrifice another creature. Brian Stout Arm deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player. So this is just Fling on a creature that also has lifelink, and we have a little bit of life gain synergies in the deck, so that's a little bit of a nice fit. Next up I got Perforos, God of the Forge, classic in mono red burn strategies, 3 and a red for a 6/5 god. The most important text is whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So every time we recur our commander either out of the graveyard or casting it out of the command zone, our Perforos is going to be doing an additional 2 damage on top of all the other triggers that we have going on. Like if you're flinging it, or the ETB trigger from the commander itself, you're going to be doing an additional 2 damage, and that gets pumped up even more if you have cards like City on Fire, 5 red, red, red for an enchantment with Convoke. That's important. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. And I picked this one over Fiery Emancipation because of the Convoke. This is a very creature heavy deck that we have most of our things like our removal, our ramp, card draw. As much as we could get on creatures, that's what I did. I wanted to have most of our effects on creatures so that we could trigger cards like Perforos more often, and that really lends itself to the Convoke on City on Fire. So not very often you're going to be having to cast this for more than 3 mana. Another fantastic one in the deck, Warstorm Surge, 5 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature ETBs under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So that's just another way we could do another 6 damage with our commander, and that's every time it comes in. Next up, we'll go over some of the draw in the deck. Faramir, Field Commander up first, 3 and a white for a 3/3 human soldier. Again, the important text being at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, draw a card, and we don't have any ring tempting stuff, so the next part doesn't matter. So basically every time our commander is going to be coming into the field, we're going to be drawing a card on our end step. So that one's really nice. And then we have the package of white ETB creatures that are drawing us cards, because I'll go into it a little bit later, but we do have some blinking going on. We can either use it on our commander to deal more damage, or we can use it on something like Inspiring Overseer to draw more cards. Another one that's similar to Faramir, Norn's Wellspring, 1 and a white for an artifact. Whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1 and put an oil counter on Norn's Wellspring, pay 1 and tap, remove 2 of those counters, and draw a card. Seeing as how our plan is to constantly be sacrificing our commander, looping it in and out of the graveyard, it's going to be piling counters on this, and we can just every turn pay 1 tap and draw a card. In the similar vein, since it's fitting the same strategy, Rumor Gatherer, 1 white, white for a 2/1 elf wizard with Alliance. Says whenever another creature ETBs under your control, you scry 1, but if it's the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw a card instead. So all those cards are pretty similar in what they're trying to do. You're either ETBing drawing cards or dying and drawing cards, but we also have the life gain off of our commander. We're gaining 3 life whenever it ETBs, which is just enough to trigger cards like the Gaffer, 2 and a white for a 2/3 halfling peasant. At the beginning of each end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you can draw a card. So just like Faramir, we only need our Phlage to come out once per turn to be getting that card draw on our end step. And possibly the best card draw in the deck, Well of Lost Dreams, 4 mana artifact. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained if you do draw X cards. And possibly the most important aspect of the deck, yes, the damage is really important, but the recursion is really where this deck is going to have to shine. The first one I want to talk about here, Felden of the Third Path. This is a repeatable way to get our commander out of the graveyard, or at least a token copy of it in this case. 1 red, red for a 2/3 human artificer. 2 and a red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact addition to its other types. It gains haste, and you sack it at the beginning of the next end step. So that part doesn't even matter because we're going to be sacrificing it to its own ability instead. However, it's just another copy of your commander. We also have some just one-off effects like Helping Hand, 1 white mana for a sorcery. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Again, once you get that engine going, when you have your Perforos out, your City on Fire out, all these damage doublers and triplers and extra damage that we get to pile on, we don't have to bring our commander out of the graveyard that many times to be able to kill our opponent. opponents. So having Helping Hand, having just a couple of ways to do that will be enough to eventually burn down our opponents. Another fantastic way to get our commander out of the graveyard, Luminous Broodmoth, 2 white for a 3/4 insect with flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, you return it to the battlefield under its control with a flying counter on it. So your commander comes in, sacrifice it, bring it back with the Luminous Broodmoth, get the ETB trigger again. You'd have to bring it back with something like Helping Hand to be able to trigger that Luminous Broodmoth again. But since we have so many ways to get our commander out of the graveyard, Luminous Broodmoth is just a fantastic fit. Another repeatable way we have here, Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, 3 and a white for a 2/2 bird cleric with flying. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Obviously, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So we do have a fair amount of artifacts and legendaries in the deck, enough to make Tashar worth it in getting our commander out of the graveyard just a couple more times to really push it over the edge. So similar to Fling, there are some ways we can respond to our commander's sacrifice trigger. That way we can get another of the ETB triggers to do the 3 damage and gain 3 life. And that is to flicker our commander while the sacrifice triggers on the stack, like Cloud Shift, 1 white mana for an instant. It has to all be instants because you have to be able to respond. So exile target creature you control, then return that creature to the battlefield under your control. You just get a second trigger when your commander ETBs when you have cards like Cloud Shift. There are several ways that we can blink our commander at instant speed in this deck. Cloud Shift is just one of them. Next up for our removal category, like I said, most of it's going to be on creatures such as Dwergar hedge-mage, 2 and 1 hybrid boros mana, 2/2 dwarf shaman. When it enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or more mountains, you may destroy target artifact, and when it ETBs, if you control 2 more planes, you may destroy target enchantment. So by the time that you're going to be wanting to destroy artifacts and enchantments, which is going to be a little bit later in the game, you probably are going to have 2 planes and 2 mountains. So when this ETBs, you get to destroy both. Also works with our flicker effects. If we don't want to use it on our commander, if we really needed to remove some stuff, we can flicker it with something like Cloud Shift to be able to get another artifact and another enchantment. Another fantastic creatures for removing artifacts and enchantments, Space Marine Devastator, 3 and a white for a 3/3 Astartes Warrior with Squad 2, which means as an additional cost to cast a spell, you may pay 2 any number of times, and then when this creature ETBs, create that many tokens that are copies of it. If you need to get multiple artifacts and enchantments off the battlefield, you can pay a bunch of mana into this and then get a bunch of copies, which also works really well with stuff like, our Warstorm Surge, Perforos, things like that. However, it says when it ETBs, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. Pretty basic, but the Squad is really what is pretty nice on this card. And we got another new one out of Modern Horizons 3, Witch Enchanter, 3 and a white for a 2/2 human warlock. When Witch Enchanter ETBs, destroy target artifact or enchantment in opponent controls. And the backside is a land, Witch Blessed Meadow. As Witch Blessed Meadow enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters battlefield tapped and it taps for white. And that is it for Phlage Titan of Fire's Fury. This one's a really interesting one. I've always wanted to have a Fling deck, so when this commander came out, I saw that you can respond to the sacrifice trigger with Fling and then just do a whole bunch of burn damage in Boros, getting the recursion from the white and the damage from the red, just a perfect combo. And I had a bunch of cards for this deck already, so this one is a little bit more expensive than most of my decks because of some of the cards I already have, Solfim and Terror of the Peaks and things like that. Just kind of drives up the price, but you don't have to have those cards. You could probably make a pretty good budget version of this deck with just some cards that you have and maybe $50 or somewhere around there. But I do have this one ordered. It's coming in the mail right now, so I'm stoked to be able to get some games in with it and see how it actually plays and see how consistent it is. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty strong, so I'm really stoked to get this one in paper. But that is all I have for this episode. If you guys want to check out the full deck list, I have the Archidect link in the description. Feel free to give that a click. Also, feel free to subscribe if you guys want to see more deck techs similar to this one. But that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.